Welcome back to PM Agenda. Joining me on my panel today is former Labor strategist Bruce Hawker there in Sydney, and here with me in the Canberra studios, a political consultant and former Chief of Staff to the Howard government, or John Howard, I should say, Grahame Morris. Thanks for joining me. First, looking at the situation in Iraq, it's a very different situation than more than a decade ago, but can you see any situation now where we might send troops back into that country?
Well, not for a while, I don't think, but, you know, Mohammed must just shake his head. You know, we've had this fight between the Shiites and the Sunnis for a couple of thousand years, and here we are, you know, and I think this is really important that our government and the media and various others explain what this is all about. And it does seem to me that we've got some sort of Muslim zealots. And if they, you know, they've already driven down the main highway and got within an ace, or a couple of cities, of the capital Baghdad, and if they did take over the government of Baghdad, the sort of government they would bring to that part of the world just seems to me to be unacceptable to anybody. And it's sort of disappointing, I suppose, that there isn't a strong sort of Muslim authority that can sort of bring everyone together and bang their heads together. You know, the idea that we've got, you know, people killing each other in Iraq, you know, this is going to get ugly. But you know, I cannot see that there is a case yet for us to go in there, and before we do, I think it's very, very important that everyone explains to the mums and dads and everyone else why instability in that part of the world affects us, and it will. But people have to explain it first.
Bruce Hawker, we did hear from the Defence Minister David Johnston just in the last half an hour. He says Australia will do what it can without putting boots on the ground. So without him confirming it, I understand that, you know, I guess Australia is offering intelligence, but also what can we do in terms of humanitarian assistance? So essentially what I'm asking you, what is it that you would like to see the Abbott government do here? Not put troops on the ground if it does come to that, but offer as much humanitarian assistance as it can?
Absolutely, and you know, we've got to remember that there actually wasn't an Al-Qaeda or terrorist presence in Iraq until the West intervened. And so in a bizarre sort of a way, you know, even though Saddam Hussein was a monster, he actually had these characters under control. And now, of course, as a vacuum's been created by the withdrawal of American forces, we're seeing what's happened there, and that is a reversion to the age-old infighting between those two groups within Islam. But also a failure on the part of the government there to really spread power amongst all of those groups, not just one particular subgroup of Islam. So I think Australia will really have to just be very careful right now about what it does. It will take its lead, obviously, from the United States, but I think in due course, if and when this is brought under control, it's safe for humanitarian agencies to go back into Iraq, then they should. And that, of course, is the best form of international diplomacy that we can really bring to bear on it. We can demonstrate that, you know, this is the better way of operating. I don't think anything other than strategic airstrikes is being contemplated by the Americans. You don't get any impression from anything that the President is saying that they're going to do anything other than that. And that in itself is a complicated exercise, as many people have pointed out. When you don't have sufficient intelligence about where these characters are on the ground, you could end up just firing on innocent people.
Grahame Morris, just quickly before we move on to domestic issues, do you think there's a lesson in hindsight here? Was it wrong, do you think, to topple Saddam Hussein, or did we pull out troops from Iraq too early? Was there not enough assistance?
No, the world is a much better place without that drongo. But yeah, look, he could make a case that we pulled out a bit early, but you know, it seems to me at some stage we needed to say, righto fellas, we've trained you, we've got rid of the baddies, you're on your own, see how you go, and by the look of it at the moment, they're not coping.
Okay, looking at domestic issues now, it looks like the debt levy will be the first major piece of budget legislation to pass. A bit ironic, given that the first bit of legislation is increasing tax rather than lowering taxes, as the coalition promised.
Yeah, I suppose so, but you know, even I run around the big end of town a fair bit, and even they weren't complaining about the 2% levy. They would just say, oh yeah, it's probably fair given that the rest of the market got whacked. But it shows you that if you have a sensible opposition that works with the government, as will probably happen on 87, 88, 90% of the time, then you know, you can get stuff through the parliament without relying on the independents.
This is the only piece of legislation, Bruce Hawker, that Labor have been even willing to contemplate. What other some of the major pieces of legislation do you think that they should start negotiating on? The fuel levy, the Medicare co-payment, any of those?
No, certainly not the Medicare co-payment. I think the fuel levy is going to go through with the support of the Greens anyway. I think Labor would wholeheartedly support any proposal by the Abbott government to abandon the paid parental leave scheme, their $22 billion bonanza on behalf of wealthy women who want to have babies and
but we
take
keep on
6 months
hearing
off.
from Labor, Bruce Hawker, that they're willing to work constructively with the government, but they haven't actually shown that, have they?
Well, the first piece of legislation that's come up, they're supporting it. So I don't think you can really make that case. But look, the budget is so appalling in so many respects. It's very hard to find an area where the opposition can say, yes, we will go down and negotiate. I mean, they're not going to negotiate over the co-payment issue. I mean, it's very fundamental principle for Labor.
What if that is tinkered with, do you think? If the rate is dropped to maybe $5, there's a means testing element to it, do you think Labor will come to the party at any stage on the Medicare co-payment?
No, I don't think they will. That's my gut feeling. Obviously, you never say never on these things, but I would be very surprised if Labor is prepared to support that in any shape or form. You know, it's holy grail for them, and I think it goes to the heart of what Labor believes in a fair society where everybody has access to universal health care regardless of their income.
Grahame Morris, the paid parental leave scheme has come up again today. We've got Ian McDonald and Corey Bernardi, perhaps usual suspects, complaining not only about the debt levy but the paid parental leave scheme. Now, we know that it's not that popular when you speak to coalition MPs around the corridors, but this is a signature policy for the Prime Minister. It's been talked about how this will damage him personally because it is his pet policy. How do you think that's a bit of overplaying or do you think that it is quite damaging if this paid parental leave scheme doesn't get through?
Well, I think by the look of it, the Prime Minister is going to try his darndest to get it through, but at the end of the day, politics is about numbers, and you know, it's going to be close in the Senate as to whether or not it gets through. But you know, I don't think he's going to give up, and it may well be that he has to negotiate a bit further down so that he can get a part of it through. And in the end, you know, if the Greens are true to their policy, they may well say, Prime Minister, we're with you.
Yeah.
We're 2 weeks away from moving into the next Senate as well, the Clive Palmer era, you might call it. Do you think things might change in terms of the relationship between Tony Abbott and Clive Palmer when the reality hits for Clive Palmer and he is actually looking at these bills? Do you think their relationship will improve? And have you seen this all before? This kind of posturing, I mean.
Oh, well, that's true, but at the end of the day, you know, senators have to put their bums on the seat either to the right or the left of the Senate president. And that gets really hard, but it will be negotiations step by step, and there's going to be a hell of a lot of time spent just talking one-on-one with some of these people to try and get them over the line. Otherwise, the government's going to be struggling with its agenda.
Bruce Hawker, also the ETS, over the last couple of days, Labor will look to the Paris conference in September next year. Would you like to see Labor go to the next election promising an ETS, or would you like to see them pare that back a bit, perhaps a cap and trade system only on transport and electricity?
Look, I think it's such an important issue that Labor really should nail their colours to the mast on an emissions trading scheme, or something which is equally as effective in reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I actually think we were ahead of the world to a large extent a few years ago. Now we're starting to lag behind, and I think it's such a critically important issue, not just for Australia but for the world, and most particularly for the next generation. These people are looking to Labor to really, lead on this issue. Yes, it's a tough one, and we've lost a lot of skin over certainly the carbon tax issue in the past, but sometimes you've just got to stand up and say, this is something that I believe in because it is so important. And it'll be like they are saying, what did you do in the war, Daddy? What did you do to stop climate change? I think it's something which this generation of politicians is going to be judged on in years to come.
Grahame Morris. Now, Tony Abbott's had quite a successful trip to the United States. He doesn't exactly see eye to eye with Barack Obama, but they didn't necessarily agree to disagree or anything there. There's elements of Barack Obama's scheme that certainly Tony Abbott is an endorsement.
No, I think that's right. And I think there were quite a few journalists and commentators and Labor Party people who ended up with omelette on dial. Look, it was always going to be a successful trip. They're two grown men. But back on the ETS, we had the Labor Party spokesman yesterday saying, look, I'm not quite sure whether or not in a couple of years' time we're really going to back this ETS thing.
That's fair enough, though. They've got 2 years to formulate their policy before they go to an election.
I do understand that. But he was essentially saying, I'm going to have to wait until I get the faceless men to tell me, and in the meantime, I'll be a bit fluffy. Now,
That's not right.
I think they should. I think they should junk the policy. But it was interesting that the chief spokesperson isn't quite sure where the Labor Party will end up on this, and maybe he had a rush of common sense to the head. Good on him.
But isn't it sensible after Copenhagen to wait to this Paris meeting in September of next year, see where the rest of the world's at, and then formulate a policy?
Yeah, too right. And.
But isn't that what Mark Butler's saying?
But that's what Copenhagen was all about years ago. Sure. It should be in the bin. Yeah. In the bin now.
No, that's just nonsense. Of course, absolute nonsense. A serious fight against climate change is so important to the future of this world. Not just Australia, but the world. And to say that we should just go around junking policies because it might upset a few people is just arrant nonsense. Let's get real with this.
Come on, you two.
Let's get real.
Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris, I'm going to have to leave it there. I'm sure you will resume this fight next week with